Right now, at the ports of Los Angeles, Rotterdam, and Singapore, enormous orange and red steel machines are unloading the global economy one box at a time. They are called ship-to-shore cranes. They are 12 stories tall. They cost $12 million each, and almost every single one of them was built by the same company. A company most people have never heard of. A Chinese state-owned enterprise that quietly and methodically captured over 70% of the global market for the most critical piece of infrastructure in world trade. Here is something worth thinking about. When people talk about the global supply chain, they talk about ships. They talk about containers. They talk about ports. But nobody talks about the cranes. That is a mistake. Without the crane, none of it works. A ship-to-shore crane, also called a key crane or a gantry crane, is the machine that bridges the gap between the vessel and the land. It reaches out over the water, locks onto a container, and swings it onto a truck or a rail car in under 90 seconds. A modern terminal might need a dozen of them operating simultaneously to unload a single megaship. Without them, a $200 million vessel just sits at the dock bleeding money. These machines are not interchangeable. They are engineered to match the exact width of the ships calling at a specific terminal. They require years of lead time to order, months to install, and decades to replace. Once a port has committed to a particular crane, they are committed. Full stop. And right now, the company that builds most of them is called ZPMC, Shanghai Zhenhua Heavy Industries Company. And understanding how they got there tells you everything about how the modern world actually works. To understand ZPMC, you have to go back to 1992. China at that point was not a global logistics superpower. It was a country in the middle of an economic transformation, trying to figure out how to compete in industries that the West and Japan had dominated for decades. A man named Guan Tongxian founded ZPMC in Shanghai with a simple but almost absurd ambition. He wanted to build port cranes and sell them to the world. The problem was that nobody took him seriously. At the time, the crane market was controlled by European and Japanese manufacturers, companies with decades of engineering pedigree, established relationships, and the implicit trust of port authorities worldwide. ZPMC's solution was not to out-engineer them, it was to outprice them. Price. Dramatically. They leveraged China's state-backed access to cheap steel, government financing, and a labor force that could work at a scale Western manufacturers simply could not match. They built a massive factory on an island in the Yangtze River, one of the largest heavy manufacturing facilities on Earth, and began assembling cranes at a speed and cost the rest of the industry thought was impossible. Their first major international contract came when they underbid every competitor for a crane order from Miami. The Port Authority was skeptical. ZPMC delivered on time and under budget. Word spread fast. Here is where the story gets familiar, because what happened next is not unique to cranes. It is the same pattern you see in semiconductors, in solar panels, in shipping containers themselves. Once ZPMC had the volume, the economics became self-reinforcing. Every crane they built gave them more data, more engineering refinement, and more negotiating power with their steel suppliers. Their fixed costs were spread across an ever larger production base. Their price kept dropping, their lead times kept shrinking. Western manufacturers could not keep up. Liebherr of Germany, Mitsui of Japan, companies that had defined the industry for generations, watched their market share collapse. By the 2000s, most of them had quietly exited the segment entirely. The math simply did not work for them anymore. And ports, remember, are not flush with cash. A port authority in New Orleans or Felixstowe is not looking to pay a 30% premium for a European crane when a ZPMC crane does the same job and costs significantly less. They have infrastructure budgets, political pressures, and obligations to keep fees competitive. The cheap option wins almost every time. By 2020, ZPMC had supplied cranes to over 100 countries. Their machines stand at every major port in the United States, across Europe, throughout Southeast Asia, and along the entire African coastline. They did not conquer the market. The market handed it to them. one budget-conscious procurement decision at a time. This is the part that nobody in the industry liked to say out loud. For years, the fact that a single Chinese state-owned enterprise controlled the infrastructure layer beneath global trade was treated as a procurement detail. A footnote, not a strategic concern. The cranes worked. They were well engineered, ports were happy, so nobody asked the next question. That changed around 2023 when the United States government started asking it very loudly. Congressional investigators and Pentagon officials began looking at ZPMC cranes not as pieces of machinery, but as networked endpoints. Modern QE cranes are not dumb steel. They are equipped with sensors, computer systems, and remote diagnostic capabilities. They are connected to port operating software. They talk to terminal management systems that track every container moving through the facility. The question being asked behind closed doors in Washington was not whether the cranes could be remotely disabled. It was whether they already were being passively monitored, whether the data flowing through those systems was going somewhere it was not supposed to go. ZPMC and the Chinese government denied everything, but the concern had been planted. It was almost impossible to disprove because the alternative, ripping out and replacing decades of installed infrastructure, was economically unthinkable. And that is the trap. The same trap has appeared throughout this story of global logistics, whether it is a Dubai company controlling port concessions for 50 years, or a private classification society too embedded to be replaced, or a leasing giant locking shipping lines into decade-long contracts during a crisis. The infrastructure gets installed, the dependency gets built. By the time anyone thinks to ask who actually controls this, the answer is uncomfortable, and the exit is prohibitively expensive. The United States has announced funding to reshore crane manufacturing. A company called Pacico, once an American icon in the industry, has been cited as a potential domestic alternative. But rebuilding that supply chain from scratch will take years and cost billions. In the meantime, the ZPMC cranes keep running. The ocean moves everything. But the machines that touch the cargo first, the machines that translate the ship into the supply chain, they belong to one company from one country, answering ultimately to one government. Next time your package arrives early, picture the crane that made it possible. Then ask yourself whose crane it actually was.